Yo, check it out. Back in L1, Liberty City was all shiny on the outside, but the streets were crawling with crews doing their thing. Shit was wild, people getting capped left and right. In this criminal playground, our boy Claude and his girl Catalina were making moves, hitting up banks and whatnot. One night, they decide to knock over this bank in Liberty City. It's dark and windy, perfect for some action. They're in there doing their thing when suddenly the alarm goes off. Catalina's out the door first with the loot, and Claude's bringing up the rear with some other dude. Just when it looks like they're home free, Catalina pulls a fast one. She whips out her piece and points it at Claude, saying something about being an ambitious chick. But get this. Turns out Catalina can't shoot for shit. She pops off a couple rounds and Claude goes down, but he ain't dead. The cops show up and save Claude's ass, but he's still in deep trouble. As soon as he comes to, they throw him in front of a judge. Dude gets slapped with 10 years for armed robbery. The so-called law doesn't stand a chance against the rich and powerful criminals. When Claude and a few other felons were being transported to prison, a group of armed robbers stopped the police convoy at Callahan Bridge. Under the threat of guns, the cops calmly opened the prison van without firing a shot and slowly walked out with their hands up. The robbers, who were pros at their job, didn't make things hard for the cops. After getting their VIP, they blew up the bridge to stop anyone from following and made a quick getaway. In the chaos, Claude and another inmate, 8-Ball, teamed up, knocked out a guard, hijacked a car, and escaped to Portland. They suddenly found themselves free, but Claude didn't feel any joy. At that moment, he only had one thing on his mind: revenge. Caitlin was going to pay for her betrayal with her life. But now, broke and powerless, Claude didn't even know where he'd sleep that night, let alone find Caitlin. 8-Ball, who could see the trouble Claude was in, offered him a safe house in Portland for free. Not only that, but he also helped Claude meet Luigi, a key member of the Leone family. To make ends meet, Claude took on all the dirty jobs Luigi had in the days that followed. He worked as a pimp and a hitman, taking out competitors. Even though these were small tasks, Claude did everything with precision and care, quickly becoming Luigi's top guy. Later on, Luigi, looking to get closer to the Leone family, introduced Claude to Joey, the young prince of the family. With this, Claude moved up in the ranks of the Leone family. The jobs he got from Joey weren't small time anymore. Instead, he started handling disputes between gang forces. Claude got his chance to prove himself and didn't let Joey down. His name quickly spread around Portland, even reaching Tony, the Leone family's second in command. Tony took notice and soon requisitioned Claude from Joey. In the days that followed, Claude, leading the Leone family soldiers, went to war with the Triads over protection money, throwing Liberty City into chaos. With bullets flying everywhere, Claude showed his exceptional skills once again, cutting through the Triads' ranks and taking out many of their top men. The Triads lost their leadership and fell into chaos, their front lines collapsing. Finally, to finish off the Triads, Claude, under Tony's orders, drove a garbage truck loaded with a time bomb into their fish factory. After the explosion, the Triads were left without their main force. With the backing of 3 key members of the Leone family, Claude made his way into the family's inner circle and met the Godfather, Salvatore. Having someone as capable as Claude was a big win for the Godfather. Salvatore welcomed him, but being the cautious type, he wanted Claude to take care of a few more tasks for the family to prove his worth before officially bringing him in. Since the details of those jobs were still being ironed out, the Godfather asked Claude to pick up his wife, Maria, and take her to a party. But things got a little out of hand with those rich ladies, and they ended up getting reported for all sorts of things: porn, gambling, drugs, you name it. The FBI soon surrounded the place. Luckily, Claude's driving skills came through, and he managed to get Maria out in a stretch Lincoln, evading the cops and getting her safely back to the mansion. That whole ordeal left a lasting impression on Maria. She couldn't forget this cool, quiet guy who saved the day. When Claude met the Godfather again, Salvatore dismissed everyone else and got real with Claude about the family's problems. Recently, the Colombian cartel started pushing a new drug called Spank on the Leone family's turf, causing them serious financial losses. The Godfather wanted to hit back, but with their funds stretched thin from dealing with both the Triads and the well-funded Colombians, they were in a tight spot. So, the Godfather made a deal. If Claude could secretly find and destroy the drug cartel's manufacturing plant in Liberty City, his status in the family would be secured. Claude, along with 3 other key members of the Leone family, tailed a traitor within the family for days, trying to track down the Colombian cartel's drug lab. Finally, one night, they caught the traitor heading to the docks and meeting up with the Colombians next to a freighter. The drug lords were quietly chatting, but what really shocked Claude was seeing his target for revenge, Catalina, along with her new boyfriend, Miguel, who was also a big shot in the Colombian cartel. Claude was ready to draw his gun and take them out right there, but then his rational side kicked in. He realized that if he acted now, he'd alert the entire cartel and blow the mission. So, he had to watch as his enemies slipped away. With Catalina and Miguel gone, Claude turned his anger on the traitor. He slammed the pedal and sent the guy straight to hell. After confirming that the freighter was indeed the drug lab, Claude decided to sink the entire ship. He ordered $100,000 worth of explosives from 8-Ball overnight. The money was paid, and 8-Ball, being the helpful guy he is, even offered to handle the detonation. The next day, Claude set up a sniper position near the freighter and started picking off guards one by one, clearing the way for 8-Ball. A little while later, 8-Ball successfully planted the C4 in the ship's cabin and set it off. When Claude got back to the headquarters, the Godfather, who had already heard the news, was waiting for him in the lobby, full of praise for how things turned out. They were about to throw a big celebration for Claude, but suddenly, a nasty job came up that needed to be dealt with, and Claude had to take care of it himself. Even though the request seemed a bit odd, Claude, being the straightforward guy he was, drove to Luigi's nightclub without giving it much thought. On the way, while he was daydreaming about a better future, his pager suddenly went off with a message from Maria. She warned him that the task was a trap and directed him to a small port on the coast. That bombshell of a message made Claude uneasy. Why would the Godfather want to kill him? Was Maria lying? But why would she? After some thinking and inner turmoil, Claude ditched the mission and headed to the port, full of doubts. When they met, Maria laid it all out for him. Without much build-up, and after just one fling, the impulsive Maria had a moment of madness and told the Godfather that she was deeply in love with Claude. Naturally, this drove the Godfather, who was already green with jealousy, to want them both dead. After Claude was out of the way, they could use his head to strike a deal with the Colombians and the Mafia triads in Portland. The Colombians were already gunning for Claude anyway. When Claude heard the brutal truth, he almost wanted to curse out loud. Knowing she'd messed up, Maria brought in a friend from the Japanese Yakuza, Asuka, to help Claude escape from Portland. But killing Maria wasn't an option. Claude could only escape to Staunton Island by boat. Although Claude was supposedly under the Yakuza's protection, Asuka didn't trust him right away. The gang doesn't support freeloaders. If Claude wanted to keep their protection, he had to prove himself. The only proof Asuka would accept was the Godfather's head. It was a big ask, but it fit with Claude's plans. After all, if the Godfather was going to be treacherous, Claude wouldn't hesitate to be ruthless. A few days later, Claude ditched his usual look, returned to Portland, and hid out near Luigi's nightclub. The moment the Godfather stepped outside, Claude pulled the trigger. One shot, and the Godfather was gone. News of the silent hitman taking down the Godfather spread fast. Once Asuka got word, she finally agreed to bring Claude into the Yakuza and introduced him to 2 more key members of the gang, Kenji, the big brother, and their strategist. Starting from scratch again, Claude had no choice but to grind it out as a foot soldier. With these 2 guiding him, he played a dangerous game with the local police and rival gangs, taking out informants and destroying evidence at the police department. As his status in the Yakuza climbed, Claude found himself on the bad side of both the underworld and the law. If one day the Yakuza gang abandons him, what would Claude do as a lone wolf? While he was pondering his next move, someone rang the doorbell and broke the tension. During a mission to destroy evidence, Claude followed Ray's instructions and snagged some juicy info from the police, a photo of real estate tycoon Donald chewing on human flesh. To show his appreciation, Donald decided to meet with Claude personally. If you've played Vice City, you might think this guy looks familiar, and you'd be right. He's Avery Carrington's protege. After the events in Vice City, Donald made his way to Liberty City to expand his empire, but his mentor Carrington mysteriously disappeared. For those unfamiliar with the story, let me sum it up. Carrington's disappearance is closely tied to Donald, and it's not a happy ending. Although Donald is just a real estate mogul, he loves to mimic his old master Carrington's moves, stirring up gang wars behind the scenes to drive down property prices and then swooping in to make a killing. To keep building his business empire, Donald wants Claude to escalate the conflict between the Yakuza gang and the Colombian cartel, pushing them into a point of no return. The plan is pretty straightforward. Use the Colombian cartel to take out Kenji, the second in command of the Yakuza. When Claude heard this request, his eyes widened like his brain had short-circuited. But then, something clicked. The saying goes, "When the bird's caught, you hide the bow. When the rabbit's cooked, you get rid of the dog." As long as the gangs are locked in endless war, who's going to pay attention to a mute like Claude? What's one more betrayal if it means taking control of his own fate? So, Claude disguised himself as a Colombian drug dealer, drove a gang car, and took out Kenji. This move successfully plunged both gangs into a full-blown war. While everyone else was caught up in the chaos, Claude worked quietly for Donald, raking in money and searching for any trace of his girlfriend. But things took a turn when Claude was intercepted by the Colombian cartel while trying to recover some goods. A showdown erupted at the airport, and Claude wiped out the gangsters. He then followed the trail to a construction site on Staunton Island. While searching for the goods, he unexpectedly ran into Catalina and Miguel. They were so shocked they froze for a moment. Claude seized the opportunity, drew his gun, and took control of the situation. Desperate to survive, Catalina immediately turned on Miguel, shooting him in the back. In the chaos, she managed to flee the scene. By this time, Asuka and the Yakuza had arrived at the construction site, fueled by their hatred for losing Kenji. They brutally tortured Miguel for information. With his intel, Asuka launched a frenzied revenge plan against the Colombians. They first used Claude as bait to ambush the cartel's armed forces, then deployed their men to wipe out drug trafficking sites across the city in a single day. To top it off, they handed Claude an RPG and tasked him with taking down all the planes loaded with Colombian flour. The series of explosions at sea seriously hurt the Colombian group, but it also enraged them big time. When Claude got back to the construction site, he was met with a grim scene. Yakuza corpses everywhere, including Asuka's. All that was left was a note from Catalina saying they had kidnapped Maria. The plan was
Claude
simple,
wanted her
yet
back,
risky. He had to bring
Claude walked
$500,000
right into the enemy's
to the
lair with
Colombian gang's headquarters.
$500,000.
Catalina
mix
wasn't
of love
surprised
and
when she
revenge
saw
driving
him and decided
Claude
it was
set
time
out to
to
meet
meet
them
them
alone
alone with the cash. Just as her goons were about to kill him, Claude managed to grab a pistol and used his sharp shooting skills to take them all down. He then chased Catalina, who was trying to escape in a helicopter. The chase led to a showdown at the dam, where Catalina tried to use the helicopter's firepower to take Claude out. But Claude was quick on his feet, dodging her attacks and eventually taking the shot that blew up the helicopter, killing Catalina in the process. In the aftermath, Claude found Maria at the deepest part of the dam and rescued her. They settled into a life of peace and contentment. As for Cedar Forest, things had calmed down from the gang fight chaos. Local resident Lao Peng told the police he saw an armed robber and a black-haired woman fleeing together. The explosion caused some panic, and a few residents were injured. When the helicopter went down, it was like a fireworks show for those watching from their gardens. Sadly, the death toll climbed above 20, and the police were still searching for bodies. No official word yet on the Colombian gang's involvement, and the cause of the whole mess remains a mystery. The explosion even ruined some people's manicures and outfits. And with that final gunshot, GTA 3 wraps up its story. In 1986, Sonny Forelli, the head of the Forelli crime family, called all the family leaders to Mark's restaurant to talk about a big issue: Tommy Vercetti. Tommy was part of the Freddy family 15 years earlier and had risen through the ranks with his daring and careful approach. But Sonny, known for his leadership, started feeling threatened by Tommy's growing power and decided to set up a trap to deal with him quietly. While Tommy was on a mission secretly set up by Sonny, 11 assassins suddenly appeared and surrounded him. Despite a fierce fight, Tommy managed to take them all down, 11-0. It was just a lucky break. The commotion attracted the FBI, and a bunch of cops showed up quickly, arresting Tommy, who was out of ammo and supplies. He ended up with a 15-year sentence. Now that Tommy's out of prison, figuring out what to do with him is a tricky problem. Sonny, realizing he made a mistake, didn't want to keep such an unpredictable element around. After some thought, he decided to send Tommy to Sin City down south to work on the drug trade there. If Tommy failed, he'd be left to handle things on his own. Kill themselves, but if they succeed, they'd head south and work as prostitutes for free. The next day, Tommy grabbed the family's cash and headed to Vice City to meet with local lawyer Ken Rosenberg. With Ken's help, they met the flour supplier at an old dock. Just as they were about to make the payment and finalize the deal, an unexpected third party attacked from the shadows. 3 bystanders were killed instantly. Luckily, Tommy reacted fast and got out of there. Although he avoided immediate danger, he lost both the money and the goods. Tommy had no choice but to come clean to Sonny about the fiasco. Sonny's initial response was full of pleasantries, but once he heard about the failed deal, his tone turned threatening. To calm Sonny down, Tommy promised he'd recover the money. Tommy felt a heavy weight of betrayal after sacrificing 15 years of his life for this treatment. This set the stage for future conflicts and misfortune. The next day, Tommy and Ken met at the law firm to figure out their next move. They quickly zeroed in on the deal's facilitator. Colonel Ann Cortez was hosting a yacht party for the city's elite, so Tommy decided to attend, using Ken's party invite. At the party, the colonel welcomed Tommy and promised to help him recover the lost money. He also arranged for his daughter Mercedes to provide some comfort, even though the colonel's words seemed a bit hollow. The trip wasn't a total bust, though. There was some progress made. Thanks to Mercedes' introduction, Tommy and Ken gathered a wealth of information about the city's top players. Ricardo Diaz, known as the Flower Overlord, was particularly intriguing. After the party, they returned to their office, but their trip hadn't yielded any solid leads. Ken suggested Tommy meet Kent Paul, a local know-it-all. At the Marabou Hotel, Tommy had a chat with Paul, who helped him recall a hotel cook who had recently gotten rich. Tommy tracked down the cook to the back alley of Ocean Avenue, but a brake failure led to a mishap, and the cook got away. While Tommy was still grappling with the setback, a man in a white suit approached. He praised Tommy's driving skills and introduced himself as Lance. Lance had been at the transaction and lost his goods and his crew in the mess. Since they shared a common goal, Lance proposed an alliance to uncover the true culprit. Tommy, wary of trusting outsiders, was hesitant, but with the cook's crew approaching, he reluctantly agreed to work with Lance. They managed to escape the situation with Lance's help. After parting ways with Lance, Tommy was still frustrated by the dead end. Then, he received a clue about Diaz's goods and payment from the cook's crew. Putting the pieces together, Tommy realized his adversary might be the underground emperor of Sin City. As tensions built, Sonny's threatening calls added to the pressure, reminding Tommy and Ken that Sonny's patience was running thin. With no guns, money, or support from Sonny, their situation was becoming dire. Fortunately, Sonny's cousin Giorgio was facing a 5-year prison sentence for fraud. To save his cousin, Tommy came up with a plan. Under Ken's guidance, Tommy networked with jurors, altering their perspectives through friendly interactions. In the end, Giorgio was acquitted, giving Tommy and Ken a much-needed breather. However, Tommy was growing increasingly fed up with Sonny's relentless demands. Tommy realized that even if he recovered the money, he might never surpass the family's status. So, he decided not only to continue gathering evidence to find the real murderer, but also to build his own power base. To do this, Tommy needed capital, so he embarked on his first major money-making venture. During this period, he met real estate tycoon Avery Kellington through Ken. Kellington, rich and influential, was looking for a skilled right-hand man to handle business obstacles. Tommy, with his range of abilities, was the perfect fit, and they quickly became partners. They started by tackling various tasks for Kellington, fighting in warehouses and orchestrating remote demolitions. These activities not only fattened their wallets, but also earned them Kellington's trust and support. It was through Kellington that Tommy learned of Colonel Cortez's situation. When Tommy met the colonel again on his yacht, Cortez confessed that his right-hand man, Gonzalez, had betrayed him, leaking information about Tommy's transaction. Though Tommy was mainly focused on recovering his money and wasn't interested in Cortez's internal conflicts, the colonel insisted he clear Gonzalez out of the way to gain further advantage. Tommy, driven by his frustrations and grievances, took a chainsaw to Gonzalez, releasing all his pent-up anger. Impressed by Tommy's effectiveness, Cortez was unwilling to let him go. Tommy found himself repeatedly engaged in shady dealings for Cortez, gradually enhancing his reputation, increasing his wealth, and expanding his network. His growing influence even earned him favor from Diaz, the Flower Prince, during an escort mission. At this point, Colonel Colster's update had come in. While there wasn't solid proof yet, all the signs were pointing to Diaz, the big shot in Sin City. Tommy was understandably anxious about the situation. It looked like conflict was unavoidable, but his group was still too small to take on Diaz. Realizing the challenge, Tommy came up with a strategy. Ever since the escort mission, Diaz had been trying to win Tommy over. Instead of resisting, Tommy decided to play along and get close to Diaz's operation, using the opportunity to learn about the inner workings, and eventually take Diaz's place when the time was right. Lance, who caught wind of Tommy's move, went undercover in Diaz's organization under the alias Quentin. To quickly gain access to Diaz's inner circle, Tommy and Lance collaborated to take on assignments, quickly eliminating rival gangs and expanding their influence. Their constant interactions during this period helped them build a strong bond, and they earned Diaz's complete trust. Just as Tommy was gearing up to strike Diaz, Paul dropped a bombshell that made Tommy break into a cold sweat. Lance, in his quest for vengeance, had attacked Diaz after discovering he was responsible for his brother's murder. The attack failed, and Lance was captured and taken to a dump on the other side of the city, where he was tortured. With his friend in dire straits, Tommy couldn't sit idly by. Despite the risk of everything he'd worked for going to waste, he rushed to the dump alone. Despite heavy security, Tommy's sudden appearance startled everyone. He boldly declared, 1-100, I've got the upper hand, and swiftly overpowered the bandits, rescuing Lance. Although he'd managed to save his friend, the looming threat of Diaz's retaliation was clear. Tommy quickly made a decision, dragging Lance to Diaz's mansion to prepare for the next move. By this time, Tommy and Lance had thoroughly scoped out the mansion's security and Diaz's routines during their undercover stint. Despite being ambushed by Diaz's forces on their first entry into the manor, Tommy and Lance, with their skilled maneuvering and fearless approach, managed to clear the path and dismantle Diaz's guard team with ease. It didn't take long for them to overpower Diaz and end his reign. With Diaz's fall and the last shots fired, Tommy avenged the wrongs done and seized control of the Flower Overlord's assets. Though Tommy's rise seemed assured, he underestimated the local gangsters and business figures in Sin City. The death of Diaz sparked a united front from gang leaders and business owners who showed respect for Tommy. It's often said in the underworld that respect is a two-way street, and Tommy needed to navigate this carefully as the new power in town. In the days that followed, Tommy and his team visited various influential figures and businesses, extending their support and building relationships. The young and impressionable leaders quickly agreed to pay protection money. Tommy also allied with the Cuban gang from West City to take over the Haitian gang's territory, earning Umberto's approval. His impressive riding skills helped him win Baker's favor, leading to the surrender of the motorcycle gang after Tommy retrieved Baker's prized bike. Tommy's growing influence was further bolstered by his efforts with the popular band Love Fist, enhancing his organization's reputation. Observing that local tensions were easing, Tommy aimed to solidify his control over Sin City by emulating real estate mogul Kellington. With Ken and Kellington's assistance, Tommy acquired several prominent local businesses, including a taxi company, a movie studio, an auto shop, and a nightclub, ensuring his dominance in the city's economy. As Tommy was finalizing a major purchase, a printing shop reminded him of his past. His father had worked at a printing factory to support the family, and Tommy had often visited the factory as a child. This reminder brought a personal touch to his relentless pursuit of power. Tommy, wanting to help his father, spent a lot of money to buy the entire factory because he thought it was worth it. He believed his feelings were priceless and that he'd only lose a little. But he was surprised to discover Feng Chu, an old factory worker, had been involved in making counterfeit money. Feng Chu wanted to grow the fake money business and restore the factory's former glory. Tommy's friends and audience could sense his frustration through the screen. But as they say, good friends can only share in hard times and success. With the organization thriving, internal conflicts started. Tommy's good friend Lance began slacking off at work and drinking heavily every day. Lance was responsible for a regional incident. Tommy often complained about how the loot was unevenly shared. Tommy, who saw Lance as a real brother, tried hard to calm him down, but this only set the stage for future problems. The troubles started when the threat from the north arrived at Tommy's doorstep. One day, thugs attacked the printing factory and stole all the counterfeit money. According to the old worker, it was the Forley family behind it. As soon as Tommy left the factory, he got calls for help from his guys all over the district. It was the Freddy family causing trouble again. Tommy, furious, went to the different locations and took out the troublemakers. When Tommy got back to the mansion, he saw Ken and Lance in a panic. He found out that Sonny was coming with his own crew to deal with them. Sonny was likely angry because Tommy had earlier attacked his men. Tommy quickly told Ken and Lance to prepare fake money and gather their crew for a fight. When the former leader came to greet Tommy, Tommy was uninterested and walked down the steps with Ken and Lance, looking coldly at the old gang leader. The mood dropped instantly when Tommy spoke. The reason was simple. Tommy had been wronged by his family after serving 15 years in prison and was left to fend for himself in Sin City. Nobody could accept this. On the other hand, Sonny looked down on Tommy, shouting at him and warning him not to forget his place. Tommy offered Sonny $300,000 in fake bills, hoping the uninvited guests would leave. But when Sonny got the cash box, he looked at Tommy greedily and continued to accuse him of being ungrateful. Lance sided with Sonny, and his betrayal instantly changed the situation. Not only was the city gate wide open, but all the guards had been moved away. In this desperate situation, Tommy felt excited and shouted, "Won 1,000, the advantage is mine." Tommy turned into Scarface, pulled out his weapon, and shouted, "Say hello to my little friend." Each shot he fired meant the end of a life. Every body turned into a step leading to the throne. Tommy used this to trap and kill waves of enemies in the hallway. In no time, the mansion was covered in corpses. Tommy had completely lost faith in people. Whether it was his good friend Lance or his former boss Sonny, he no longer hesitated to pull the trigger. With the sound of the last gunshot, Tommy won the battle and took the victory from all his rivals. CJ, after spending 5 years away, returned to Los Santos, the city he knew best, upon hearing that his mother had been murdered. He wanted to take a taxi straight to Grove Street, but the police stopped him. The black officer, Tenpenny, and the white officer, Pulaski, gave CJ a fake charge and forced him to work for them. After their conversation, they threw CJ out of the car and drove away. CJ had no choice but to walk home. Carrying his bike and looking at his mother's photo, he felt deeply sad. Suddenly, Smokey, a heavy smoker, came running down from upstairs. He mistook CJ for a thief and nearly hit him with a baseball bat. Once he recognized CJ, Smokey expressed his sympathy and took him to the cemetery to find Sweet, CJ's brother. Sweet had been supporting the Grove family alone while CJ was away. CJ also met his sister Candle and his good friend Lay. Delthwaite was unhappy with CJ for leaving 5 years ago. The Grove family was in decline, and they were under a lot of pressure, especially from their rival, the Ballas Gang, which was dominating the area. CJ, under pressure and facing danger, decided to stay, revive the family, and continue looking into his mother's murder. As CJ settled back in, he exercised, maintained friendships, and tagged walls with old Custwit to announce the Johnson brothers' return. With Ryder, CJ cleaned up Rock Candy's employees to prevent harm to his crew. With Smokey, he chased down a train to stop rival gangs from making deals. Grove's actions became bolder. CJ and Ryder stole ammunition from a train and robbed the National Guard's warehouse. They fought the Mayozi gang from Siberia, retreating under heavy pursuit. CJ's series of daring missions allowed him to regain his confidence. During this time, CJ learned that his mother had died in a chaotic battle. The attack was aimed at Sweet, who was the only one left in the house after random shooting. CJ suspected there was more to the story but had few clues. Meanwhile, his sister met a boyfriend, Caesar Sweet. CJ worried about him, but after seeing that Caesar was into racing, he bought a West Coast jump car. It turned out to be a dance competition, where CJ impressed with his driving and dancing skills, winning Caesar's praise. Initially, CJ wasn't keen on accepting his brother-in-law, but Caesar's gentlemanly behavior won him over. Soon, Caesar arranged a racing competition where CJ made good money and grew fond of illegal racing. However, happiness was short-lived. Thompson Nee showed up and ordered CJ to kill people and set fires to cover up his corruption. CJ returned home, overwhelmed with work, and discovered that the enemy boss was attending the funeral. He then led his crew to ambush CJ, who was now facing a deadly threat. Easily defeating the leader of the Ballast gang gave Sweet a boost of confidence. He decided to join forces with other families to negotiate and show his commitment to fighting Rock Candy. Sweet went to the meeting alone, while Hal and others were waiting for their chance. The police started an air raid, and Hal didn't want to leave his brother behind. However, Smooch and Later fled. Carl dealt with the SWAT team that came from the sky to help his brother escape from the rooftop. Luckily, Smooch and the others didn't get too far. They managed to escape, but the police were still in pursuit. Carl shot to delay them. Smoker caused a commotion, crashing a car into a billboard. Thankfully, several people jumped out of the car and survived. After this setback, Sweet didn't give up. He planned a major attack on the Ballast gang, gathering a large crew to prepare for the assault. Carl was about to join the raid when he received a call from Caesar. Caesar said he needed to explain something important in person. Carl was curious and went to meet him. Following Caesar's directions, Carl saw Riddell, Barris Bangstone, Smoker, Tenpenny, and others. It suddenly hit Carl that the attack was a setup involving these two traitors and the police. In other words, his mother's death was directly connected to the betrayal of these two. Carl was feeling defeated and turned away, thinking about Sweet, who was still preparing for war. He rushed to warn his brother, but it was too late. Sweet was already surrounded, and Carl fought desperately, but was overpowered by the large police force. Both brothers were arrested. Sweet was taken straight to prison, while Carl was secretly transported to the countryside by Tomlin. After all, Tomlin wasn't going to let such a useful asset go easily. In jail, Carl felt confused and helpless, unable to get revenge or find relief from the endless suffering. At this point, his brother-in-law, Caesar, offered help. Caesar introduced Carl to Catalina, a fierce woman. She forced Carl to help her with a heist involving an oil tanker and then a racetrack. During their time together, Catalina fell for Carl and tried to ignite a romance, but Carl wasn't interested and avoided her advances. In the countryside, Carl looked forward to seeing Caesar's brother-in-law, who was also skilled. Whenever there was a racing task, Carl would be called to participate. This time, his competitor was Wu, the leader of the triad who controlled the main territory in San Fierro. Even though he's blind, he can do many things that regular people can do. At the start of the game, Carl easily took first place. The fifth-place finisher accepted a bet and lost, giving Carl a business card before heading back to San Fierro. Carl then encountered another mysterious figure, Claude from Liberty City. It was surprising that Catalina was somehow won over by Claude. Carl finally relaxed, but Catalina threatened a rematch. In the rematch, Carl won without a hitch. Catalina then pulled out a defense weapon from the garage and left for Liberty City with Claude. Since the garage was in San Fierro, Carl decided to settle there. He and Claude, along with an old man who called himself the Truther, arrived in San Fierro and found that the so-called car repair shop was actually just an old warehouse. Carl was furious and blew up on the spot. His sister and brother-in-law calmed him down, and Henry offered to help by introducing Carl to his old friends in the auto repair business. With these experts joining the auto repair shop, things started off well. However, one of the tech experts proved difficult. He asked Carl for help to win a game, starting with controlling a helicopter to prepare a car. Once in the shop, he took control of a glider and shot at his competitors. After finishing his tasks, Carl gathered his business partners. Unexpectedly, Tomney called and asked Carl to frame a police officer. Carl dressed up as a waiter, stuffed rock candy into the trunk, and called the police. Even though the police took the unfortunate officer away, trouble still brewed outside his house. At the car repair shop, a construction site worker insulted Kandelkar. Furious, Carl drove through the steel building and pushed the project manager into a deep pit, sealing it with cement. Afterward, Caesar called, revealing that he had run into the Ballas gang in the suburbs. They seemed to be heading to San Fierro to stir up trouble. Carl decided to find out who their supplier was, so he went to meet them and followed their route. In a small town, Carl observed from a rooftop and saw Ryder, followed by Steak Mongus, the leader of Fire Ye State, then a mysterious foreigner, and finally Pimp Kichis. It was clear they were meeting to make a deal. Carl didn't make a move but went back to the garage to plan with his brother-in-law. Woozy, who was visiting his subordinates, introduced the key players. Carl thought they might be involved in something shady. Carl decided to make a breakthrough. He took over the nightclub owned by a pimp and started picking up the girls working there. Pimp Kichis was pleased and introduced Carl to Steak. Steak seemed nervous, as his partner was in trouble. Carl drove to the airport, cleared the obstacles, and rescued the partner, who turned out to be the mysterious foreigner named Torino. There was little known about him, but Carl didn't care about his background. His goal was to find Ryder, so whether Steak, Torino, or Yoshiko, they were just obstacles in his way. To disrupt their intelligence, Carl chased Yoshiko and managed to get his phone, which revealed that the next trading spot was Pier 69. Carl and Cesar watched from a distance, noting the numerous gunmen with Steak. Fortunately, Carl had some backup. Eventually, Leader made an appointment with Torino and arrived in a helicopter. He made a grand entrance but quickly fled after spotting the Tiger Temple. Carl didn't want to miss this once-in-a-lifetime chance, so he rushed straight to the dock. With Caesar's help, they managed to take down Steak. Metal fell into the water trying to escape. Carl leaped onto the yacht's bow, leaving Ren, once a good friend, with Torino and Smoke. They quickly figured out Torino's location. Carl arrived at the helicopter pad, but even though Torino had already taken off, he was still in reach. The fate of the mother and son who had been shot by artillery weighed heavily on him. Feeling guilty about the people he had helped, Carl began to seek revenge. He assisted Woozy in setting up a trap for his uncle, sneaked into a Vietnamese gang's freighter to plant bugs, and then moved to another ship to rescue refugees. This series of actions started to build Woozy's reputation. Recently, Carl received a strange phone call from someone using a voice changer who claimed to know Sweet's whereabouts and asked Carl to meet him in the north. Carl was shocked to find that the mysterious caller was Torino. He wasn't dead from the explosion and turned out to be a secret agent. Torino's mission was to work undercover against rock candy dealers. Torino didn't blame Carl, but invited him to work together. Initially reluctant, Carl learned more about Sweet's situation and realized Torino was anything but ordinary. Torino's request was unusual. He wanted Carl to buy an abandoned airport and learn to fly a plane from scratch, mastering everything from takeoff to landing. Carl spent time flying in circles, flipping, and maneuvering until he was proficient enough to handle the plane. I'm not sure how long it took, but eventually, Carl mastered all the flying skills. Then Woozy called and invited Carl to check out his new territory. Carl traveled north and found the Las Vegas Five Sons had opened the Four Dragons Casino. Woozy was willing to share shares with Carl if Carl helped him handle the mafia. Carl quickly took action and wiped out the enemy family in one go. The next day at the factory, Truther called Carl to go to the desert to pick up two people. One was the old friend, know-it-all Kent Paul, and the other was another familiar face, Ken. Ken, who had been kicked out of criminal court, had come to Las Vegas seeking refuge. His situation was dire, caught between two major families, and he would be the first to go if a fight broke out. Carl wasn't worried at all and took Ken along. Ken then managed to eliminate all the threats. On their way back, Carl encountered a man about to jump off a building. The man was once a popular rapper, Mad Dog Duo, who had hit rock bottom after losing his father-in-law. Carl rescued him and took Duo to the hospital. Just then, Ken called with urgent news. Godfather Salvador himself was coming to inspect the work. Since Carl had previously worked with Salvador's son in Liberty City, the Godfather wanted Carl to work for him. A group planned to assassinate Carl in Las Vegas. They boarded a plane to intercept him. Carl, who had no interest in flying, was quickly helped by Yuntang Kongming to deal with them, retrieve the documents, and the attackers fled by plane. Carl didn't pursue them but predicted their landing and completed the mission. According to Tenpenny, Carl was supposed to deliver the documents in the desert. However, Tenpenny had a hidden agenda and planned to eliminate Carl to prevent future issues. He left Pulaski behind to handle the situation and took off with the documents. Carl, aware of the trap, was stabbed by a companion but managed to escape, chase Pulaski, and defeat him despite Pulaski's insults about Carl's family. Carl returned to Las Vegas, where the Godfather continued to give him tasks. Carl used the opportunity to end his association with Paul. Later, while managing the Four Dragons casino, Carl found it challenging to resolve issues. During a warm-up show, he met a young boy, Dawa, who needed help because his mansion had been taken over, and he couldn't focus on his music. Carl immediately went to Los Santos, led the triad to reclaim the mansion from invaders, and called Ken and Paul for assistance. While recording, Dorino contacted Carl and asked him to complete one final task before seeing his brother. Carl needed to sneak onto an aircraft carrier and steal a jet. To accomplish his task, Carl needed to disable the surface-to-air missiles first. He took to the skies, engaging in an aerial battle during the night and ruthlessly destroying the fleet designated by Torino. True to his word, Torino directed Carl to the police station to retrieve the Sweet brothers. The reunion was joyful for Carl, who had gained fame, but Sweet was focused solely on managing Grove Street. Returning to his hometown, Carl and his companions arrived at the mansion, only to find it overrun by guests and corruption. On TV, reports revealed that Tenpenny had been acquitted, sparking chaos across the city. The streets were ablaze, and Barras Bang members were rampant. Sweet, frustrated by the loss of territory, let the chaos spread. Despite Grove Street's resurgence, Sweet eventually found leads on snooker. Carl, feeling the weight of his past actions and the scorn of his brother, decided to take matters into his own hands. He launched a full-scale assault, stealing an armored vehicle and crashing into Smoke's building. With Barras Bang members on every floor, Carl fought through them, driven by vengeance. In the dark, he confronted Smoke, his former brother, who had become a despot. Carl, battling in the darkness, finally killed Smoke. Tomlin, seizing the moment, took Smoker's dirty money and shot Carl, causing him to desperately call for Sweet. Tomlin fled, setting the building on fire as he went. Carl escaped the flames, pursued Tomlin, who was attempting to flee in a fire truck. Sweet caught up, hanging from the ladder of the truck, and Tomlin, in his haste, crashed off a bridge into Grove Street, killing everyone inside. With the troubles now gone, everyone celebrated. Carl quietly walked away, and when his sister asked where he was going, he simply replied, "I just want to walk around the street."